The next panel is around startups, which is a very exciting conversation. I think, especially for Africa, we're looking at startups and where that can go, because that's where the majority of our people are. So Hannah and Tim, I hope you will give us exciting news that there's enough funding from this table to give everyone in the startup ecosystem. But before I start, Hannah, I always have to put you on the spot. Which is your best African country? Oh. And good luck, because you might be lynched after this, so good luck with your answer.
We're watching you.
Oh no, well, I'm wearing a shirt that I got in Makala Market in Ghana, so I think I have to say Ghana. But, but it sounds like I'm in trouble already, so...
So I think for all the Africans in the room,
that warm introduction.
Yeah, no, I was going to get something for you. So all the Africans in the room, if you want Hannah to be your favorite, please give her a piece of clothing by the end of this day. So Hannah, take it away. Thank you.
Excellent. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to see so many people excited about startups and here to listen to our talk today. My name is Hannah Swaby. I have 7 years of mobility experience in startups in Estonia. I've worked all over the African continent. This is a subject that I am very passionate about, and so is our amazing panel that we have here for you today. I would like to start by letting the panel introduce themselves to you, because I think in their own words they can put it the best. But I would challenge the panelists to tell us not only who you are, what you do for work, whereabouts on the continent you're located, but also what is your connection to Estonia and what actually brought you here today. So maybe we can start down at the far end.
All right. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Much better. Thank you very much. My name is Caroline Wanjihia. I'm Kenyan by birth, African by, maybe origin, but also Estonian by profession. Why do I say Estonian by profession? Lovely. I'm the regional director for Bolts in Africa and the international markets. So this is my home headquarters. And as you can see, or for those of you who may not know, I'm wearing the colors of the Estonian flag. So welcome to the home of Bolt. For those of you who may not have tried Bolt, please try it. We've got a variety of services for you to try. The Bolt ride. There's a Bolt micromobility for some of you who like, using their bikes around. So welcome, and I'm looking forward to engaging with you. Thank you.
Nice. My name's Caleb. I am Australian Ethiopian by origin. I guess living in Kenya, in Nairobi, same as Caroline. And I guess dress code Estonian too. So that's like my one claim to Estonia, unfortunately not by profession. But I'm the CEO of a company called Tech Safari. I've been operating across Africa for the last 6 years. But started Tech Safari about a year ago, really covering what's happening in tech across Africa. And through that, looking at how do we get the rest of the world engaged with what's happening in the continent. And that's how I met a lot of the folks in the room, Daniel, and many others who have sort of connected me to Estonia. Alongside Tech Safari, within that, we found that there's a lot of need for companies that want to expand to the continent. There's a few companies here that have headquarters here, but now have expanded. Bolt is one. There's many here who want to do the same. And so along developing that sort of agency that helps these companies expand onto the continent, we came across Latitude, and they hosted their first spin-off of Latitude 59 in Kenya in December last year. We were joined by a few of the folks here. It was a fantastic event, and we hosted them and helped them sort of launch into Kenya. And so that's my first connection with Estonia. Sure, let's hear it. Latitude is a fantastic conference. And so far I've just been loving it. It's been a fantastic time. I went to a swamp the other day. It's a very surreal place, I think, coming from Kenya. So it's been a great time so far.
Hi everyone, my name is Aziza. I'm Tunisian, based in Tunis, and I'm part of Brighter Bridges. And Brighter, actually, it's a data and market intelligence company. What we do is that we provide data, insights, and intelligence on emerging markets, specifically on Africa, because we believe that there is a knowledge gap when it comes to data on the innovation investment scene in Africa, and our mission is to kind of build the knowledge infrastructure in order for us to stimulate innovation investment on the continent. And actually, we connected with Estonia through the work that Daniel has been doing in building bridges with the continent and also with the Latitude team. So actually, we also worked with them last year for the Kenya edition in Africa, and we'll be collaborating for sure for this year. So I hope to see you all in Kenya. Yeah, thank you.
All right, so hello everyone. My name is Chidi and I am Nigerian. Also, I call myself a true Pan-African because I don't have a base. I just show up wherever they need me and I'm there on the continent. But I do live in Atlanta. What I do, so right behind me it says I'm a managing principal, of Red Cola. Red Cola is a product management consulting and coaching agency. And I coach entrepreneurs, I coach CPOs, CEOs on building products that their customers love. But that's also translated, I think earlier they were talking about ALU. So all the ALU people that you saw today, those are my people. Those are public sector leaders across the continent that are here this week to immerse with the Estonian ecosystem. So Ambassador Daniel is one of our hosts. We're here to also attend Latitude 59, and I'm one of the faculty, that teaches, that's actually trying to get our public sector leaders to become product people, right? Because it's not just the private sector, right? The public sector also, we need to deliver products that our citizens love and need. So that's the connection with Estonia. We've been coming here, this is our second time to come here, and I was also at Latitude 59 in Kenya, which was awesome, and so, let's talk.
It's a fantastic mix of different experiences and different geographies, and I think we're really lucky to have such a diverse panel today to be able to discuss these topics with. I want to dive right into the core of it, which is Africa is a huge continent, 54 different countries. I think one of the things that comes up is just how does a startup even decide where to start? How do you pick that first market if you want to enter into the continent? Carolyn, I'm going to look at you. Bolt's operating in over 45 different countries. I mean, not all on the continent, but I think you have some incredible experience on expansion and growth. So maybe you can start by talking a little bit about how do you pick a market and how do you get started?
Okay. So in Africa, we started in around 2016. And in fact, our first market to launch was South Africa. Now, what were we looking at? At the time, when we looked at, what the economists and statisticians were telling us in terms of urban population, this was going to double, say till 2040. So urban population was growing, and with that also urbanization. Now, also, what was then happening, despite the rapid growth in urban population, the infrastructure was not growing at the same pace. So we saw an opportunity for us to really come in and democratize transport within the continent. At the same time, we also saw a huge penetration of mobile phone usage and internet. Yeah, I think one of our speakers today told us penetration is not the issue, usage was actually growing. So therefore, that was a good opportunity for us to convert these people into ride-hailing. For those of us conversant with ride-hailing, it requires internet and mobile phone usage. The other thing that was happening at the time is high levels of unemployment, which still persist. In Africa, I'm told the levels of unemployment are between 80 to 30%. So ride-hailing then was a good opportunity for these drivers to just have an opportunity to earn an income within their own terms. Yeah, so those were some of the things that were quite good opportunities for us to use then to step into Africa. Since we've been able to launch in 5 additional markets, and I'm quite excited to hear a number of the panelists talk about my markets. Tunisia, we're in Ghana, we're in Nigeria, we're in South Africa, we're also in East Africa, Kenya, and the Tanzania. So yeah, those are some of the things that we sort of leveraged on in the beginning.
Super, and I think like everything that you're mentioning in terms of data, I think Aziza, you've seen it all in the African market. Is there a different way that you need to look at data or things to keep in mind when you're looking at data on the continent that we can share?
Yeah. So actually, exactly what you said, Hannah, at the beginning. When we speak about Africa, we need to remember that it's a continent, and we are speaking about 54 countries on the continent, and each country has its own specificities. And I think when a startup is considering an expansion to the African market, it is very important to make sure that you do the homework, as we say, like that you look at the data, see if there is a market there, if there is an interest in the market. Like I think this is what Bolt, like Caroline from Bolt has been referring to. It's very important to also be aware of the consumer behavior when it comes to also the readiness of the market. Does it have the infrastructure needed? Caroline mentioned the internet penetration, the mobile usage. So depending on the solution of the startup, I think there is some work that needs to be done prior to the expansion project in order to make sure that you minimize the risk and that you have a successful expansion. And this is kind of the things, one of the things that we do at Brighter. What we do is that we try to kind of assess the readiness of the markets in Africa specifically, and it could be like a useful tool for startups considering expansion.
I think a lot of the times too, what startups run into challenges of is building these local partnerships and finding these local providers of services to help them to understand and to analyze that data that companies like you are providing. So
exactly, I think also considering the having a local partner or a local representation actually on the markets that you are going to enter is very important, because having a local person or a local partner in general can help you to minimize the risk, because they know the market, they are on the ground, they can interact more easily, etc. So I think also having or considering a local partnership is also key to also when exploring the expansion for a startup in Africa.
And Chetty, when you're coaching CEOs, do you tell them, is there any markets particularly that you warn them are more challenging than others, or is it always very specific to the businesses that they're bringing? Or
yeah, I mean, when you think about it, you said 54 countries, right? 54 administrations, 54 regulatory environments, 54. I mean, you're talking all kinds of languages, right? So ultimately, what problem are you looking to solve, right? I mean, you can't Control C and then Control V on a continent. And even, one of the most powerful startups or startup stories in Africa, M-Pesa, they couldn't do a Control C from Kenya to the next country. They actually learned the very hard way that doesn't work. So, if you're trying to do that, right, and just come to Africa and just say, okay, we're going to go to that country. I always kind of get down to, do the work, do the discovery work. I'm a product guy, so get yourself immersed, do something, run an experiment, find out where you need to go, and then you go there and use the data to determine, okay, is this the right place for us to do this? Are these problems? Do these people have our problems, right? Because many times you think they have the same problem, they don't, right? And so that is a key conversation that I have with these folks, is to say, okay, get the discovery work. And look, Bolts is Bolts. I mean, one of the per capita unicorns in Estonia, as you like to remind us all the time, right?
We're very proud.
And
we are
very proud, right? But the thing is, Bolts, very well funded, very well managed, and you came to Africa and you did all that work. Not everybody has that luxury, okay? And, again, you talk about local partners. They are struggling to be able to even do that kind of work, right? So I think that the council has always been discovery. You do discovery on the problem, you understand the market, but also understand who are the local partners, right, that can help you. Because, not everybody's Bolt, not everybody's Wise, right? Not everybody's Skype. There are folks who are, trying to just figure it out. And so the council is always, bottom line, what's the value prop? Are you really trying to solve a problem that they have, right?
I think it's a great segue into the next portion, which is talking about the success stories. You mentioned Bolts, of course. I'm going to mention it again, but I think Africa as a continent has 7 homegrown unicorns. So this is fantastic. It's something that I think, Caleb, through your reporting, obviously you know a lot about these success stories. But I think how do we take the experiences of these success stories, both the domestic and also the ones that are coming in from abroad, and how do we leverage this to build more amazing and incredible startups?
Yeah, totally. So I think we'll probably talk about this a little bit.
Do we have mic for Caleb?
Hello, testing.
Oh.
Yeah, Caleb is not supposed to speak. So
He's to be.
we cut him off. We took him out.
Okay. Can everyone hear me anyway? At the back?
Maybe not.
They can't.
Yeah.
Can you hear me at the back, or? Yeah, you can. All right.
Ah, okay,
We'll
good.
just continue and then hopefully the mic.
I think the mic is coming to you.
Okay.
But maybe I'll jump over to Chetty first then, because Chetty's also been dealing with success stories. And does the Bolt story help? Does the unicorn chasing help? Or does more need to be done in the continent to actually support these locally grown businesses and get things started?
Yeah, so, look, Bolts is Bolts. Bolts is not an African unicorn, right? It's an Estonian unicorn. And so to the extent that Bolt is successful in doing what it's doing, I know, Caroline, I don't know if we're piling on you or if we're not. We'll see by the end of this if you're still speaking to me, right? But the challenge with unicorns and trying to, build these unicorns. And remember, unicorns are based on valuation, right? They're not revenue companies. So that means that maybe they've raised a whole bunch of money. Bolt is showing that Bolt has revenue. They actually have a bottom line that is sustainable and that allows them to do business over there. The challenge is that 7 unicorns, in Africa, and then that becomes a metric that is used to determine how hard or how easy it is to do business in Africa. Meanwhile, there's, Caleb will tell you, there are a lot of companies that are doing very well in Africa. They're not unicorns, right? What they are is that they're solving real problems. And to the extent that some of them have avoided going after the VC money, there's advantages to that, right? And then there's some who got the VC money and imploded, right? And they imploded because, there's this saying that success is not because of starvation, it's because of gluttony, right? And so we want to make sure that our startups are not chasing funding or chasing unicorn status just to say we have unicorns. We want Wises, we want Bolts, we want Skypes. We want companies that are actually doing real good. And so, I think chasing unicorns, I am not a big believer, right, in the unicorn status. I'm a big believer in we're making money, we're hiring people, we're solving problems, wicked problems. Africa, we are wicked problem central, right? Wicked problem central. So come and solve problems. Don't come there trying to get yourself a market that will now give you unicorn status, right? You get money and you get a valuation. I think that starts to become a challenge for many of us.
Solving real problems. I think that's a great way to just start by assessing the people that are coming in and what they want to do. Caleb, do you want to jump back on success stories?
Yeah, for sure. So I think Chidi makes a great point. Like, we always point to the number of unicorns we have in a country. I did a post on Estonia, like arriving in Estonia yesterday, and I was talking about how it's a tech country, and I think is it 10 unicorns in Estonia
10
today? 10?
I think the last time we checked.
Yeah, which it could be 11 now, to be honest. But that's a great metric, right? Like 10 companies worth $1 billion. But I think on the continent, across Africa, and just generally, like, value is not an indicator of like true money being made or true returns. And I think going a step deeper, like, it's not just like are we making money or are we hiring more people? It's like, are we returning that money? And I think that to me is the like sort of hallmark of like an ecosystem that works. And we have a lot of unicorns. We have 7 unicorns, but not as many exits. And that's what I hope that we're going to see a lot more of in the next like 3 to 5 years, especially as funding dries up and as appetite kind of like is a bit more skeptical about the continent. An example of this going well is a pretty well-known story across the continent, Paystack. Paystack, and it also ties into this idea of like launching with local partners. So Paystack is a payments company, allows e-commerce companies to transact. Payments are just such a nightmare across the continent, especially, I found it tough in Nigeria as well, like making international payments. And so like they allowed merchants to accept payments globally. And Stripe, which is the biggest payment company in the world, or like the biggest payment company in the US, invested in Paystack to have a local partner to see how they operated. Paystack goes out to raise a Series B, and instead they get an acquisition offer from Stripe for $200 million. That's like a great example of a company working with a local partner to enable them, give them expertise, and then actually acquire them, take the next step. But then what it does for our ecosystem is it means that now all of the employees of Stripe have money, and so they're investing in other startups, their friends' startups. We now have I don't know if there's an Estonia mafia or like a Skype mafia, but we have a Paystack mafia, which is just all the founders that have gone on to build amazing companies that are growing, and they all sort of invest in each other. They get their first checks from their employees, and also a lot of the angel investors and VCs that invested in Paystack have now gone on to invest in way more companies. Like, there were so many more angels after 2020, investing back into Nigeria. And so I think these are sort of the success stories we need, where people actually get their dollars back and they keep investing in the ecosystem. And also where global companies, like, we want to invest in these companies to see them grow as well. So I think that's a great success story on sort of all levels.
I think that's some of the exciting things we've seen starting to come out of Bolt, is that we have some of our former country managers that are now launching their own businesses on the continent and doing incredible things. And you know, we're still formerly Bolt, not Weir anymore. They're still doing fantastic things, but also former team members are now starting to build that, you know, Mafia presence, and it's expanding. Carolyn, like, maybe you can tell some of these success stories, or one really good one that you've had in the last year with launching a market, or with growing a market, or overcoming a challenge that you faced in a new space.
Okay, and maybe I'll also just use that to share some of why Bolt is where it is today, at least in Africa. What we've tried to do is use our local solutions, but to address local challenges, which I think has been a consistent theme throughout the day-to-day. How do you use the existing products to address local challenges? When we first launched in 2016, across most of our African markets, they are cash-based economies. Now imagine if when we launched, we went and introduced Bolt, but payment using a card system. Would never be where we are today. So what we did is revolutionize payment. We allowed our riders and our drivers to actually use a cash-based system that had largely been ignored by some of our competitors. So that gave us an edge. So speaking to localization of the existing challenges that the riders or the community is facing, but then it just doesn't stop there. You have to continuously innovate to tap into this. Once we had launched and now we were full cash-based, what happened? M-Pesa hit the world. So if we had limited our payment options to cash, that means you're locking out quite a number of users on the platform. So it's figuring out what's happening, but then continuously innovating. Then along the way, yes, we had good mobile penetration and good internet, but the usage was very low. Again, our drivers need internet, they need phones. So we had to actually partner with some of the mobile manufacturers to ensure that the phone that the drivers are using, they actually can log onto the app. Partnerships, again, that enable them to be able to get data packages at good prices. So it's not one-stop, one innovation that fits all. Again, another example, sorry, I'm using quite a number of examples, but just, to bring it home. In East Africa, those from Kenya and Tanzania, you find that a lot of the riders use something we call motorbikes, borders. In Europe, ride-hailing was a four-wheeler opportunity. We then had to open up to two-wheelers. There were concerns around safety. So what did we do? Make sure that the same way we vet the drivers for the vehicles is the same way we are vetting the people operating borders. So it continues. And that again opened us to a segment that hadn't been tapped to globally. Now, recently and within the East Africa space, sustainability is a big thing. So what do? Advance it to the EV motorbikes. But initially, they're very expensive. Again, partnerships with manufacturers, with financiers to bring the cost down. So I think if I was to summarize the Bolt success story, our product, but localization to address the local challenges. Is it one-off? Absolutely no. There's a challenge every other day. How do we innovate to address that?
Exactly. And it sounds like you've hit all of those problem points right on to really actually solve real issues, like you're saying. So excellent. I think that transitions us into talking about challenges. And I think when I think about expansion, and I remember my expansion days as well, localization and bringing a European company into the African continent comes with a lot of challenges. It comes with regulatory challenges. It comes with social challenges. I mean, often you're bringing an HQ-based support team down into multiple markets simultaneously, and you run into cultural clashes and challenges of communication. And I'm just wondering, for teams, what is the best way to approach this? How do we try and harmoniously expand our businesses and build culture that's going to be synonymous with what we were starting on the European continent if we're going into African markets? Maybe Chetty, I'm going to throw this one to you first.
I was writing, please don't ask me.
It's not an easy one.
Oh, and by the way, I had no idea I was wearing Estonia's colors. Like, literally, I just put them on and I'm looking at her, I'm like, wait a minute, what the hell? So, Daniel, I don't know what you did to me, but... so that's a good question. Doing business in Africa is hard. And I don't say that because it's Africa. Doing business is hard, but doing business in Africa is hard, right? And again, we've kind of talked about how it's a fragmented market. Period. I'm sure Caroline could speak to this. It's a fragmented market. Doing business is hard, but you can't look at Africa as incremental. A lot of folks look at Africa as incremental to their bottom line. You know what? We're just gonna go expand over there. And what that does, you kind of get knee-jerky. If things start to kind of look wishy-washy, especially you see what our VCs are doing, the foreign VCs have essentially kind of repatriated from Africa because of what you call the global kind of financial crisis. And that's an incremental kind of mindset. It has to be fundamental. You have to look at it both, right, as a fundamental part of your business. Once you do that, it allows you to really think about how you expand, how you attack the market, even when the challenges come, right? And so, when things are hard, at the C level, you start to see, and I say any CFOs in the room, I'm pointing at you, when you start crunching your numbers, using Aziza's data, start crunching numbers, Africa's looking kind of freaky, and then you start running away. No, this is a long-term play. You are here to play. And if you show that long-term commitment to the continent, we are on your side. We will back you. The public sector will back you. The citizens will back you, right? But if there's that wishy-washy kind of, things are looking kind of funky, so we're going to withdraw from this market, or we're going to pull our team from that market. Microsoft, and they're not a startup. I know. They used to be, but, they just essentially eliminated their, Africa Development Center in Lagos. Everybody is gone, right? That is kind of a wishy-washy kind of approach to things. We're looking for startups. We're looking for companies that are coming on the continent, and we see, they see the continent as fundamental. So that starts to kind of bring more success. But there are challenges, and those challenges you have to address them head on as opposed to trying to run away from them.
It sounds like they've left a lot of really good talent on the table, though.
So if anybody's looking, I know people, I know all of them. Okay, I don't know all of them, but I know many of them. There are a lot of people who are ready to come and do some hard work. So, let them know.
Super.
Yeah. On that, I think what is key when we speak about expansion for Africa specifically, because as Shidi said, like working in Africa and building and doing business in Africa can be challenging. So the idea is making sure that the product is relevant actually for the market, and making sure that you also have on the back of your mind that you are going to adapt. Exactly what Caroline has pointed out in terms of, for example, the payment method that they have adapted based on the method, payment method that the population is using. For example, in Tunisia, unfortunately, until now, we are very cash-based economy in general, but it's starting to shift. But for example, Bolt is available with that payment method. So making sure that the product is relevant for the market you're expanding to, taking the time to adapt, being consistent, also making sure that you are on the ground, but consistently adapting, innovating, being knowing how the market that you are now expanding to is evolving and adjusting your product accordingly. So relevance, being on the ground, and consistency, because I believe that it takes time. And when you are willing to do business in Africa, you need to be ready for it, and you really need to want to, actually. You don't have to perceive Africa as just a big consumer base. You really need to think about the impact, actually. What impact am I going to generate when expanding? Am I going to create more jobs? Am I going to, the impact metric and the impact factor is super important also to consider when expanding.
Absolutely.
Caroline, I think you obviously have this HQ based here in Estonia, but you're also running an HQ out of Kenya for the continent. How are the people working? How do you make sure that everybody is working together and harmoniously? And maybe you can touch a little bit on this talent side and how we build teams.
Okay. So again, the keyword localization. So there's a lot that we borrow from the HQ. But how do we then localize it to the Kenyan context? But also culturally, people are very different, in terms of male gender balance. Yeah. So just adapting to that localization has helped us. And what you also find within the African context as well, we have a lot of female empowerment. So if I look at my Africa leadership globally as Bolt, I think 42% of our leaders are female. Now in Africa, it's slightly higher, just taking into consideration the high levels of female empowerment, that is happening on the ground. But I just want also to touch on a question that you asked, and I feel like I should give an answer to, on the challenges of operating, within the continent. As you said, it's Africa is not for the faint-hearted, but it's something that you invest in long term. One of the things when we were expanding into ride-hailing that we faced is really around regulation. And I want to look at regulation on a two-pronged approach. First, it was a challenge because ride-hailing hadn't existed. And whenever we tried to operate, the governments would equate us to taxis. We're like, no, we're not taxis. We're ride-hailing. So it was very difficult. And also, when governments don't, and I say this in the most polite way, when governments don't know what to do with a sector, they tend to be reactive. And some of the legislation they'll pass will be prohibitive to industry. So that's why I say then the absence of regulation then created an opportunity for us to then now partner with governments and begin to define this is what the ride-hailing regulations should look like. It's still a journey that we are on, so that then they begin to see us as partners. They're already seeing us, but how do we take it beyond legislation that you use for revenue making, but legislation that you also use to drive infrastructure development? You can imagine as Bolt, the amount of mobility going across. So in a day, we have about 1 million rides in Africa. You can imagine if we shared that data with government, what sort of information that they would use to drive infrastructure development. So regulation didn't exist in the beginning. Now we are beginning to work together to then shape how the future then looks like.
And I'm guessing it's a lot of your local team on the ground is building those relationships with government, but then you're going back to your Estonian HQ as well and having to coordinate. So it's a lot of working between people, and I can imagine it keeps you busy.
Can I very
Absolutely.
quickly
Of
say
course.
something? So is the Bolt case is very interesting because another conversation you should have is, even when your product is there are behaviors that your product inadvertently would encourage. And I'm sure you probably know where I'm going. In Nigeria, when I use Bolt, it's actually become a communication service as opposed to a ride-hailing service. Because what happens is I get a Bolt, and then the person calls me is like, dude, I don't want to use the app, right? You could just show up, pay me $20, and we can go where we need to go. I see the Bolt people rolling their eyes because I know there's an issue. But that, I think that's an opportunity. I don't think there's an opportunity there. You might want to stamp it out, but there's an opportunity. I don't know what that opportunity is. Or let me say this, I do, but you're going to have to pay me so I can tell you guys what it is. But that's also part of the challenge is you come in thinking you're solving one problem, then you create a new problem. And are you interested in solving that problem, or do you think it's prohibitive, right, to your bottom line? So I just wanted to put that on the table.
Caroline, do you want me to bounce that back to you, or Caleb?
Let me add to that. I think that is really interesting on user behavior and what happens when you actually bring a product or launch a product on the continent, and what you think people will take out of it versus what they will. Has anyone here heard of M-Pesa in Kenya? Hand up. Cool. Okay, cool, great. So M-Pesa is mobile money. It's the first success story, major success story of mobile money. It's how I pay for everything in Kenya, and it now has 55 million users, so just massive scale. But when it started, it was used as a way for people to access financing. So it was mostly loans. So how do you access financing in rural areas? Through airtime, so actually mobile credit. But what they found was people were like, oh, actually, I can send money to my family up north, without having to physically give them cash. And they found that they had basically stumbled on this, penicillin for fintech. They had people moving money like crazy, just rapidly through airtime. And so they actually stumbled on this use case of mobile money rather than trying to invent it. So something really interesting things happen when you bring a product to a new market like that. Maybe not understanding the use case, but just testing and then adapting to that as well as you're launching.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to come right back to you because I had my next question was for you as well. But I think when we're talking about challenges, building trust and brand awareness is something that's very different on the African continent versus in other markets. And working at Tech Safari and promoting the companies that are in the market, what recommendations do you have for them? How do they kind of tap into what makes consumers comfortable with services and or what's different?
Yeah. I think that exists on a lot of levels. So how do you make a consumer comfortable with your service, product, etc., versus how do you so actually a lot of the companies I work with are startups, and they're startups at a sort of seed stage to growth stage. Or they might be more established companies that want to expand onto the continent, so say Nigeria, Kenya. The first way, which is how do you make global companies seem credible and valid, is it actually is a local partner. In a lot of cases, we work with companies, some here, others like across Europe, that want to expand, but they want to do it locally with someone who's on the ground, who has trust, who's built community. We have done that at Tech Safari just through fairly engaging content that tells people about what's happening and is kind of like a resource for the ecosystem. So I think partnering with a local partner that is credible is sort of step one. But I think the interesting thing, and probably the lesson that's a bit harder to get, is like, if you're a startup building in Africa, on the continent, a place where generally you will eventually need global capital to expand, there really isn't enough capital to go to become a massive outcome within Africa. And so you need to go global. Now, how do you go global when most of the investors that would invest in you don't actually get it, or they're instantly just they're not really there. They're looking at their own markets, their home markets. And so that to me is like kind of the challenge that I think local founders need to embrace, which is, how do I actually tell my story globally from day one? And how do I communicate that globally from day one, and sort of build trust? And I think a lot of that comes down to just being open about the work you're doing, building those relationships early. There is this whole thing of like build, locally, solve a problem. That's true. But you should also be looking at how do you communicate that globally? I think that's essential if we want to expand and we want to actually capture that capital.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Caleb is doing a great job with that, right? I mean, Caleb's newsletter tells some really great stories. The other newsletters, Meka Jene, who does the same kind of work, please, subscribe to these newsletters. Talk to these guys. Talk to myself. Talk to Ambassador Daniel. There are folks who are actually kind of doing this work and know what's going on. We are, I'm battle tested. I have a company that failed on the continent. And that in of itself, I have data that many of you will never have, right? Especially, how to pay your bills when you don't have any money. And so, it's a very important thing to make sure that you tap into these environments, understand what's going on, keep your ears on the ground, right? And kind of get away from the mythology, right? Because there's a lot of mythology. Even on the continent, Nigeria is the place to go. Why? Because we have 250 million people. Meanwhile, Rwanda that has maybe 8 million, we don't want to do business. Meanwhile, Rwanda has one of the most robust platforms for you to build a product, right? If you want to build a product, you go to Rwanda, they see themselves as what they call experiment capital or the testing capital. If you want to build an MVP, because they have the power, the infrastructure, they have an administration that is very interested, right, in you coming there and doing the work. They're actually quite wide open, right, in terms of doing business. So that's how you get your story out there. And so that would be my encouragement, right? Kind of talk to the right people and pay them too. So that's the other thing. No, seriously, there's a tendency for kind of advisory roles and all these, and then you kind of find out that it's just like a ceremonial role, right? And I'm going rogue on you. She said, don't go rogue on me. I'm going rogue. It's a ceremonial role. No. We're just as badass as anybody else out there. So bring, folks in to help you, but also pay them their value so that they actually can bring, because you'll see, you'll get half-ass work if you decide not to pay people or to give them the value that they bring to the table.
And I would say, also, if you're working with a local partner to launch your product, service, etc., on the continent, you want them to be bought in. You really want them to be on board with you, aligned to your mission. And yeah, obviously part of that is getting them on board, but a lot of that is also just paying them what they're worth. And I think I've heard of a lot of companies that have tried launching globally, in Kenya, Nigeria, but it's been half-assed because they've just been hey, can you help us out? Rather than this is actually a partnership. And I think that's where it comes down to finding the right partner, trusting them, but also really investing into that relationship and doing it for the long haul. not just running a sort of short experiment to test out Africa.
I think the cost of talent is often one of these things that we forget on our expansion checklists. Actually, Caleb and I had a great conversation about the expansion checklist and process, and like how do you really consider which markets to go into? And I think you look at the size of a market, often the very first thing people say is, oh, look at the population size. That's our business opportunity. This, you couldn't be more wrong. I think anyone who's done an expansion in the room is shaking their heads, because you need to be solving a problem, and you need to know which people have that problem, and then all the other variables that are going into things. So I think maybe from the data standpoint, how do we tell us more about the data on the market that we can be accessing or that we should be accessing, but besides just population sizes.
Yes. So actually, I agree with what Chidi said when it comes to staying up to date and hearing and reading about what's happening in the ecosystem. I mean, there is a lot of newsletter. I think Tech Safari is a great one that definitely need to be checked. Also, what we do at Brighter is we have a platform actually called Brighter Intelligence, which provides data that tracks investment deal flow on the African continent. So actually, when you log in, you can basically see the funding flow, the fundraising actually for startups based on the sector by year, etc. And it gives you an idea of the dynamics of the ecosystem. We also have a newsletter called Brighter Eye. It's a monthly newsletter actually, and it gives you updates on the state of innovation investment in Africa, and what are the top sectors, what are the most active investors, and it kind of gives you an idea about, as I said, like the dynamic, the activity of the ecosystem. But I think like also looking at the macroeconomic data. Is super important when expanding, because like you need to understand, like for example, if we take the Bolt as an example of a startup who expanded, I think also one of the things that needs to be checked is, are there any competitors on the market that I'm going to expand to? So also the competition analysis and understanding who's already operating, who's already starting to solve this problem. Can we think more of a partnership, or maybe investing and then acquiring, like Uber and Careem, for example, in Egypt? So I think there is a lot of ways to navigate, but data remains, I think, one of the biggest starting points that needs to be thought of when considering an expansion projects. Yeah. So macroeconomic, but also understanding the dynamic of the market.
Actually, you just introduced me to the Brighter platform yesterday. It's fantastic. It's, as an expansion manager, it's something I would have liked to have had my hands on back in the day.
And actually, it's there is a freemium version, it's accessible to everyone. And I advise everyone, if you really want to make sense of what's happening in the ecosystem, you can just go to Brighter Intelligence, create an account, and it's easy for free. The first version, so yeah.
Chetty, I think you're going to like this one, but I used to say to my team that there's, data for good and data for evil. And when it comes to making a business case, people are always going to collect what they want to make the business case they want to see.
Absolutely.
How do you kind of direct CEOs to be really staying focused on solving the problem and focused on actually looking for the market where they can best make their solution, rather than maybe where their personal interests are coming into play?
Yeah, so, if you're looking at Africa and you say, okay, I need to build a go-to-market strategy, right? Then that's where you start to see people get into trouble. Because, you're looking at her data and you're saying, Nigeria or Kenya, South Africa. In fact, remember when the only country that was getting all the business was South Africa, right? Because of whatever data was out there, and everything pointed to South Africa, right? And so I say, look, put the go-to-market strategies to the table for now. And let's kind of get into real kind of product management principles, which is, what problem are we solving? I mean, I think all of us on this stage agree. What problems are we solving? And where do those problems, where are they more acute? Or let's say, what environments give us the best opportunity to find out whether this is a problem we should be solving, as opposed to, deploying a solution that's looking for a problem, right? And I know that's cliche, but that's true. A lot of solutions come on the continent looking for problems to solve. And so I think that the council, as a coach or as a consultant, is, let's just figure out whether, just go there, go somewhere and run some experiments, right? Don't make any big noises. Shoot, you could even go undercover as, if you're a Bolt, you go there and say, our name is Freeze or something, I don't know. And, you say Freeze, or just some little thing, and you see whether that works out for you. Or you use local partners, right? You use a local partner to run some experiments, right? And they don't have to cost you a whole bunch of money, so that if they fail, your reaction isn't, Africa's too hard, we're out, right? Your reaction is, okay, we learned some really cool things, so we're going to, cliche, pivot, or we will figure out something else to do, or we build a communication system called Bolt Communications for taxi drivers to communicate with with riders, right?
I think we're getting into a product pitch now.
Yeah, I know. Bolt, I'm right here. So that would be my counsel.
Super. Anybody else want to touch on data for good, data for evil, and thinking how to use it to move your business? Okay. We're dated out. We've got 15 minutes left. I think I would like to give the panel the opportunity to talk a little bit about the future and what the biggest trends are that we're seeing for tech in Africa going into 2025, and what kind of opportunities are being presented. Now, you don't have to give away all of your ideas now. I think maybe some of them we want to save in, but what are we seeing, and what's exciting for us? And I think maybe we'll start at this end this time and go down the other way.
Okay, so look, this is amazing that this panel talked for almost 45 minutes. We didn't mention AI, right? So give us credit. You give us credit, right? So AI is very interesting. I've always been kind of not a skeptic, but more of a pragmatist on AI. I like all the energy that I see, but just like electric vehicles in Lagos, Nigeria, which doesn't make any sense, right? First, the roads, we're trying to get the roads to work, and then there's barely any power, So, there's a picture of a Tesla with a generator on the top driving, right? So that's the kind of stories that you see. So AI for me kind of has some of that. I think that it's, the trend is African governments, the public sector, and the private sector will come together and be like, okay, we need to slow down because there's way too much AI coming at us right now. There's just too many people talking about this. We need to put some governance in place to allow startups who want to come and do AI from abroad and on the continent, or those who are partnering, or those who are local. Then the AI conversation is going to become a lot more nuanced, as opposed to kind of this rush. It was almost like crypto three years ago. On the continent, I'm not talking about the rest of the world. On the continent, it was crazy. And the same thing is starting to happen again. And I think that what I'm seeing is there's a lucid, I think Justina on the panel before, I think the second panel, she said that, AI for creation, not AI for destruction. I think you're going to start to see governments get a little bit more lucid about that. I'm seeing that in Rwanda, I'm seeing that in Zambia. And so I think that's a trend that I would like to see continue.
I think that's a great point, and I think we're all operators on the panel, and so for us it's more about enabling us to do better work,
right,
not replacing and not, trying to find a solution for everything.
Yeah.
For me, I'd say maybe fostering more these bridges that we are starting to create actually across the continent with the work that, for example, Smart Africa is doing, also AfriLabs when it comes to the hubs and other networks and entities. I think it's super important to create these spaces where people convene, discuss. I think this is where partnership starts, and maybe also our event today, like the Africa Business Forum, is a great opportunity also to foster and build and strengthen the bridge that Estonia is supporting actually with the African continent. So this is, I think, a lot can happen if we can keep creating these spaces to foster these partnerships and collaborations. But for Africa and from a funding perspective, actually, what I am personally excited about is seeing more funding going to AgTech startup and supporting the agriculture sector because of food insecurity is a big challenge for the continent. And in the previous years, we didn't see a lot of funding going into AgTech solutions. And in the recently, we are seeing an increase of interest when it comes to supporting AgTech. And personally, I'm super excited about that because I think they are solving a real problem on the continent. And yeah.
If I just one other industry that I'm excited about is the creative industry on the continent. I can't believe I was on stage and I didn't speak about that because that's my...
Speak, we have time.
So the creative industry on the continent is on fire. So if there are any, if you're thinking about that, that's an environment that you want to be in on now, right? They are doing some really incredible things. In fact, the Paystack story that Caleb was talking about actually has a creative angle because there was a big movie that came out on Netflix called The Black Book, a Nigerian movie, won a whole bunch of awards, just a lot of accolades, and it was funded right, by two Paystack co-founders, right, and other tech people. So that money that came from Stripe found its way into the creative industry, and we're starting to see some serious energy around that. So just like the ag tech, environment, the creative and create tech environments are, please, man, if there's anybody doing that, come down. Let's make it happen, because Africa is telling its story right now.
Let me build on that. I think creative industry in general is really exciting. Like, we're seeing it in film and Nollywood, but we're also seeing it in music. Like, if you look at our top 100 songs, like, there's probably Burna Boy in there, there's probably like Rima in there, like a lot of these Afrobeat artists that are now global, like they're global superstars, and they're selling out stadiums. So that's really exciting.
And none of them are Ghanaian. They're all Nigerian.
All Nigerian, right?
No, Tyler. Tyler's from South Africa.
Okay,
Tyler. You guys surely know Tyler. I think one industry that is a little bit more techy that is also creative, that's very exciting, is gaming. Across the continent, like, we have extremely high phone penetration. So we have, like, obviously, a lot of folks here would have Samsung, Galaxy, smart, like, iPhones. But we have kind of like low-end smartphones as well, which are very accessible, very cheap. You could, like, pay $50 and you have a lot of the functionality that you'd normally have on a Samsung. Now, like, because so many young people are growing up on the internet, cheap internet and accessible phones, there's kind of like this gaming market. It's almost like hyperactive, right? Like, there's a lot more opportunity to build games, local mobile games for the continent. And there's a lot of, like, really interesting things you can do there. There's a company called Carry First, which develops games, has a gaming studio, a lot of smaller studios popping up. So I think gaming is also another really big industry that's just set to really grow as well. Personally, I'm really interested in platforms. So I think that there's a handful of platforms that have a lot of people in emerging markets, and WhatsApp is, like, a fantastic platform. So everyone communicates on WhatsApp. Actually, like, I kind of run my life on WhatsApp. Like, you organize, you're like the person to come clean your place on WhatsApp. Like, you organize things on WhatsApp. You can sell on WhatsApp. Businesses operate there. So, like, what startups are building for WhatsApp to build tooling, build services that exist there that allow for, like, e-commerce, or allow for knowledge transfer, or allow for education. There's a few very exciting startups in that space. I think that startups that build on WhatsApp have a really significant play. And then one broad one is that I think that our startup, there was this massive funding boom in 21, 22 that was just, global, like, VC. And so Africa took a small percentage of that, 1 or 2% of the global funding. So it's kind of tiny. And that has had a, like, really, that's seen a lot of new founders come into the game a couple of years ago. I think what we're seeing now is with having this really big slowdown on VC funding, and that's probably a good thing, because we're seeing that, like, a lot of the founders who now go to build something, they're serious, they're focused, they see a real opportunity, and that they're not going in being like, here's my deck, can I have some money and get started? They're building by bootstrapping first. I think that's very healthy for our ecosystem. And it means we're going to see some, like, very real solutions, rather than a lot of startups that ultimately failed because they started because people wanted to be founders rather than solve a problem. So I'm really excited for the next 3 to 5 years. It's not going to be our glory years like the last 2 in terms of funding, but I think it's a very positive thing for the startup ecosystem on the continent.
Excellent. Carolyn?
All right. So I'll talk about use cases, and just if I think about the future, and to what I think one of our secretaries to the cabinet was saying, you have as many use cases as there are hours in a day. So in the tech space, the companies that I see that will make it are the ones that tap into those use cases and create products for the different consumer customer profiles, but also localize them. And I keep going to localization, such that whatever works in Ghana may not necessarily really work in Nigeria. How do you leverage on the use case that is very particular to that specific country? Yeah, we break away from that. Africa is one big country. Tap into the use cases and localize those solutions. Now, the use cases that are relevant today may not necessarily be the ones that will be relevant a few years down the line. So how do we evolve in a much faster way? And when I think about regulation, in some of the cases, we will have to work with our regulators to define what does the legislation look like, because it will be uncharted waters that they've never experienced. It's things that possibly we also haven't experienced. So instead of regulation acting as an inhibitor, it's a partnership between the private sector and the regulators to define what is the policy that enables that sector and the sector that we are talking about to thrive. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Folks, I think we've had a really informative and actually practical hour here with everybody on the stage. So if you could join me in giving them a big round of applause. Thank you to all of our speakers.